What's happening, beautiful geniuses? Trumpeter and composer Bobby Spellman here. And today I welcome you to join me on an exciting journey to the depths of one of the great paradigms in modern music theory. The book that I have in my hand holds a special place in my heart, and it contains within it a wealth of knowledge that has been as controversial and misunderstood as it has been enlightening and revolutionary. The work contained in these pages is the first and perhaps only complete theory of music to have emerged from the rich landscape of American jazz, but it provides a unique perspective that gives us new insight and a better understanding of all styles of music around the globe. The knowledge contained in this book has been praised and used by such great musicians as John Coltrane, Gil Evans, Art Farmer, Eric Dolphy, Ornette Coleman, David Baker, and others, and it provided the foundation and inspiration for the modal approach that would be pioneered by Miles Davis in the late 50s and pursued by so many countless great musicians through the 60s, 70s, and into the modern day. Even though this book remains somewhat obscure and misunderstood, the reverberations of its influence can still be felt in music being made today. I'm talking, of course, about George Russell's Lydian Chromatic Concept of tonal organization. I've spent more than a decade studying and using George Russell's theory of music, and in the following video series I will strive to provide the most comprehensive and accurate overview of the Lydian Chromatic Concept that you can find on the internet. We're going to start today with the story of George Russell and the origin of the Lydian Chromatic Concept, as well as some of the principles that make up the foundation of George Russell's theory on this thrilling episode of Theory with Bob. Composer and theorist George Russell was born on June 23, 1923 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He started playing the drums from an early age, and by his teenage years, he'd started playing drums in a house band at the Cincinnati Cotton Club. By the time George Russell was 16 years old, he had dropped out of school, and he had started working in a department store as an elevator operator by day and as a drummer at the Cotton Club by night. In 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, George Russell was called for the draft, and he volunteered for the Marines. But during his examination for the Marines, it was found that Russell had tuberculosis, and instead of going off to war, he was hospitalized for the next 6 months. While in the hospital, George Russell passed the time learning the fundamentals of music theory and composition from his fellow patient, the bassist Harold Gaston, who would later die of tuberculosis at age 24. While in the hospital, George Russell wrote his first composition, New World, which he soon after sold to A.B. Townsend, the band leader at the Cotton Club. George Russell was eventually discharged from the hospital, and he returned to the Cincinnati jazz scene, where he started to get more serious about composition and arranging. In 1943, George Russell was hired by saxophonist Benny Carter, and he started to tour as the drummer in Benny Carter's group. During one of those tours, George Russell had the opportunity to go to New York and experience the vibrant New York City jazz scene in the mid-40s. He got to hear musicians like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and it seemed to be an inspiration to him going forward. Before very long, George Russell was replaced in Benny Carter's group by none other than the great Max Roach. So if you're a drummer and you get fired and replaced by somebody, the best possible option is that that person is Max Roach. I think that left a lasting impression on George Russell because he heard Max Roach and he said, man, I'm never going to be as good a drummer as Max Roach. So he returned to Cincinnati and started getting even more enthusiastic and interested in composition and arranging. From there, George Russell started to outgrow Cincinnati, and he moved to Chicago, where he had the opportunity to work at the Paradise Ballroom. He also had the opportunity to write a number of pieces for the Earl Hines Band. Those pieces were inspired in particular by Debussy and Ravel, and it sort of began his career as a true composer and arranger. From Chicago, George Russell and two of his friends, with $15 between them, decided that it was time to pack up and take a bus to New York City to begin their lives anew as jazz musicians in New York. George Russell arrived in New York City in May of 1945 with no money and no work. But very quickly, Max Roach took him under his wing and started introducing him as an arranger to many of the great musicians in New York at the time. George Russell started spending a lot of time with people like Charlie Parker, Gil Evans, and Jerry Mulligan. He sold one of his compositions to Dizzy Gillespie, and he became particularly good friends with Miles Davis. George Russell would tell a story of he and Miles would hang out in Miles's apartment and trade chords. They'd go back and forth and show each other some interesting harmonies and try to expand their vocabulary harmonically. And in one of those meetings, one of those hangs at Miles's house, George Russell remembers asking Miles what his aim was in the music. And Miles responded with an idea that would reverberate around in George Russell's mind for many years to come. And he said to George, "My aim is to learn all the changes." The statement was somewhat perplexing to George Russell because at the time, Miles was known as an accomplished improviser, and he was, at that time, in Charlie Parker's quintet, which is about the pinnacle of what you could do as a bebop musician at that time, or maybe ever. So George Russell found it somewhat perplexing that Miles wanted to learn all the changes, and it made him think that maybe there's another way that you could approach relating to chord changes. In late summer of 1945, after having been in New York for only a couple of months, George Russell once again came down with a very unfortunate but perhaps serendipitous case of tuberculosis. From there, George Russell was admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital in the Bronx, where he would spend the next 15 months recovering from tuberculosis. While there, George Russell started to think a lot about what Miles Davis had told him about trying to learn all the changes, and Russell became obsessed with the idea that there must be a different way to relate to chords. So he started to tinker on the piano in his room and play around with the C major scale, much to the persistent aggravation of his fellow patients. And over time, George Russell discovered a particular problem that we still face in jazz improvisation today, and it was George Russell's goal to try to solve that problem and to try to come up with a new perspective on how to look at music theory. So, in order to get a sense for what George Russell was looking at, and the problem that he was trying to solve and the ways that he went about solving it, we're going to have to go over to the piano. So follow me over here. We're going to check it out. All right, so while in the hospital, George Russell started to obsessively play with the sound of the C major scale, the scale which serves as the foundation for all of Western music. He wanted to better understand the relationship between that C major scale and the underlying C major chord. In fact, he played through that scale so many times that his fellow patients started to get very aggravated with him, and they started throwing their leftover food at him. So eventually the hospital put him in his own room where he could tinker with the C major scale to his heart's content. There was a problem that bothered George Russell about the C major scale and its relationship to its underlying chord, and it went like this. George Russell felt that rather than being in harmonic unity with its underlying C major chord, the C major scale really brought with it a certain dissonance that required it to be resolved. And for that reason, he felt as though the scale really had built into it a certain kind of perpetually resolving plagal cadence. So let me show you what I mean. The C major scale is made up of two tetrachords, C, D, E, F, and G, A, B, C. Rather than feeling like it's one unified structure, George Russell felt that what we were dealing with here is really two basically different keys resolving to one another. So to George Russell's ears, what we really had here is the first four notes sounding more in line with an F major triad or an F major sound, resolving eventually to the C major. Now you could take that one step further and you could even say that that progression is really a 4 to a 5 to a 1. It would go like this, F to G, finally resolving to C. However you want to put it, the idea remains that George Russell felt as though the C major scale, rather than being in unity with itself or harmonic unity with its underlying chord, really represented two keys resolving to one another. Now, in order to solve this problem and to try to find a system in which the fundamental scale of the theory could be in unity with its underlying chord, George Russell turned to the very physics of sound. So, I'm going to go into greater detail on this subject in episode 3 of this series, but I'm going to give you a quick overview because it's a very important part of the fundamental principles of the Lydian Chromatic Concept. So, it goes something like this. If you play a note, that note will produce what we know as the harmonic series or the overtone series. This harmonic series is a natural product of a fundamental pitch, and it really has a lot to do with the timbre of various different instruments. And it goes a little something like this. I'll give you a quick overview of this. Now, if I play this C, that fundamental C is also going to produce a C an octave above that C, as well as a G above that C, then another C above that, the E above that, the G above that, a flat B flat above that, a C above that, and so on going up. If we look at the harmonic series, the first interval is an octave, which gives us a C and another C. But the first non-octave overtone in the overtone series is the perfect fifth, a G. For that reason, the interval of a perfect fifth provides a sort of tonicization of the lower pitch. That is to say that the perfect fifth reinforces the lower of the perfect fifth, the lower tone of the perfect fifth, as the fundamental pitch because of the nature of the overtone series. So if I go from a C to a G, that G is going to reinforce C as the fundamental pitch. Now, if I go 5 notes up from G, that gives me a D. Now the D is going to reinforce G as the fundamental pitch, is going to reinforce C as the fundamental pitch. So now I have C, G, and D all reinforcing C as the fundamental pitch or the tonic of this little structure of notes. I'm going to move up 5 more notes and we get A, and then another perfect fifth from there and we get E. So now we have C, G, D, A, and E. All 5 of these notes reinforcing C as the fundamental pitch. Now, if we take these 5 notes and instead of playing them in fifths, we play them in a row, we get C, D, E, G, A, and then back to C again, giving us, of course, the major pentatonic scale, which also results in its relative minor, the A minor pentatonic scale. Now, the major and minor pentatonic scales provide an important role in music from all around the world. And you can tell the way that these scales can be gleaned from the very physics of sound and the harmonic series. All right, so now we have C, G, D, A, E. If we go up 1 more fifth from that, we get a B. This is a nice sound here. If we play them in thirds, now we get a fully voiced C major 7 with a 9 and a 13 chord, which is a beautiful sound, very consonant, and one that is very common in jazz music and music of many styles. All right, now here's where things get exciting. What if we go up 1/5 from there? That gives us F sharp. And if we play those notes in a row, that will give us the C Lydian mode. And in fact, we can play all 7 notes of the C Lydian mode simultaneously and get a major 7, 9, sharp 11, 13 chord, which has a beautiful sound to it, but it sounds consonant and it sounds in harmonic unity with itself. If we go and play that Lydian mode over the C triad that we had before, all 7 notes appear to have a more consonant relationship with that underlying chord than we get with the natural 4, which seems to have a strong inclination to resolve to one of the notes of the C major triad. So, in George Russell's mind, the Lydian mode sounded more in unity with that underlying C chord. And for that reason, George Russell wanted to place the Lydian scale at the center of his theory of music, and thus the Lydian Chromatic Concept of tonal organization was born. Now, to anticipate some dissent, putting the Lydian mode at the center of the Lydian Chromatic Concept does not undermine the importance and historical role of the major scale. It's only to say that George Russell felt that the Lydian mode sounded more of a unity with its underlying major chord than the C major scale, which really sounded as though it were two scales resolving to one another. So the point is not that it replaces the major scale, but it just gives us a different perspective on how to view that major scale. George Russell was eventually discharged from the hospital around Christmas of 1946, and in 1953 he published his first edition of the Lydian Chromatic Concept. From that point on, George Russell's ideas helped to shape the history of jazz, and in doing so helped to inspire music being made around the world for decades to come. In the next series of videos, I will try to provide a comprehensive overview of the principles underlying the Lydian Chromatic Concept, as well as discuss many of the ways that the Lydian Chromatic Concept can help us to better understand jazz, improvisation, and styles of music from around the world, and also give us new insights into different ways of thinking about improvisation and composition. In next week's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of the Lydian Chromatic Concept in the whole grand scheme of music theory, as well as discuss many of the problems that the Lydian Chromatic Concept strives to solve. If you like this video and you want to keep up to date with what we're doing here and check out some more videos on the Lydian Chromatic Concept, as well as jazz theory and improvisation, composition, and the like, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions about any of the subjects covered in this video, I'm sure there will be many throughout the course of the series, please leave them in the comments. The final video of this series is going to be a frequently asked questions video, and I'm going to try to answer a lot of the questions and tie up any loose ends that may be floating around. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and if you see that somebody else has already asked a question that you're interested in learning more about, give it a like so I know what the most popular questions are. All right, gang. I hope you had fun with this one. Have a wonderful time tinkering with sounds and improvising and composing. And I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. Wait, hold it. One more thing I almost forgot. If you want to check out some more information on the life of George Russell, you can check out Stratus Funk by Duncan Heining. There's a lot of great information in here. And if you'd like to go to the source and learn more about the Lydian Chromatic Concept of tonal organization, you can check out the book, George Russell's Lydian Chromatic Concept of Tonal Organization. Now, I'll put a link to both books in the description, and you can check them out for yourself. All right. See ya. Theory with Bob. All right, gang. Thanks so much for checking out this video. We hope it helps in your quest for the majesty of musical self-expression. The Ridgewood School of Music is currently accepting new students for lessons online or in person in the Brooklyn, Queens, and New York City area. If you'd like us to help set you up with the perfect teacher for the instrument or style that you're interested in studying, you can find us on our website at www.ridgewoodschoolofmusic.com, or you can shoot us an email at ridgewoodschoolofmusic@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to support the creation of new videos like this one, you can find us on our Patreon at patreon.com/Ridgewood School of Music. There, as a subscriber to the Patreon, you can gain access to bonus content, including bonus videos, exercises in improvisation and different instruments, as well as bonus transcription videos. So, if you'd like to help support the creation of new videos like this one, find us on our Patreon, and it's a real big help. All right, gang, have a wonderful time practicing, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?